I mean, I'd just like to ask you a lot of questions about the art of transformational coaching.
Yeah.
And I've got actually quite a number of threads that I can ask you about, but um, the the things you wrote about in your book and your website about getting at the fundamental issue, personal paradigms, this model that you have for facilitating transformation. How do you map paradigms? I even liked how you wrote about contracting in a way that makes transformation more likely. I think
Yeah.
that's a really nice topic. You know,
Yeah.
all those kind of topics. I think the quality of presence or connection also could be a topic for us to explore. So, I'll hold all that and I'll bring it in, and we'll follow the flow depending on what you say, and I think it will be a really rich conversation.
I hope so. Well, let's all that is fine. I like just showing up and being with and responding to whatever inquiry feels right to you. I think your curiosity will be a reflection of many people's curiosity. So the only
Right.
thing I would add is might be useful for us to get clear about the goal or goals of this of offering this podcast. What do you and or what do I want to um, accomplish in some sense? I'm not very goal oriented, but I do have a thought about, I've been thinking about that a little bit.
What comes up for you?
Well, I think my my point of view is that, and I don't want to characterize all coaches in the same way, is because there's quite a variation of styles and approaches. But I think I've observed that even the coaches that are taking my workshop or my practicum, um, they're already motivated to want to learn how to help a client transform. And I'm often surprised by the degree of um, almost absence of thought about what does it take to transform. And it's as if many are trained or have learned, if I show up, if I'm present, if I'm um, ask good questions, ask deep questions like, how is that a belief and how is that belief formed, that would cause or ignite an insight that would cause a transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to inspire coaches to think more deeply on the question, what does it take to transform? And I would say that's a big part of why I wrote the book, um, is to share my own perspective, but also inspire others to go much deeper as a coach into their own inquiry. So I would say that's an aim for me
That's a
and
fantastic aim.
an aim for this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful aim, and I would like to begin by asking you that question. Like having, in a way, having you repeat that. So
Sure.
my goal is to empower the coaching community. My goal is to empower coaches to do deep transformational work by sharing perspectives on that process with people like yourself and others from the podcast. So we're very aligned.
Yeah.
I won't
Good.
say much more about it. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think I
No,
think I think we're very aligned.
yeah. No, let's not say much more about it here. Um, Only because this will be a better experience the more we're real and the more we're allow it to emerge without scripting it. So I think that's enough to set the stage, and I'm happy to start whenever you're ready.
And just to check on time, I've got us booked now. This is a bit difficult with different time zones. Basically, I booked an hour and 15 minutes from the start of our call. So you have that too, I think.
I do, and I have a hard stop in an hour and 20 minutes. So,
Oh yeah, yeah, that's good.
uh,
So we'll
oh,
stop at the allotted time for sure.
right.
Yeah,
Good.
let's dive in then, Keith.
Hang on a sec. Let me find you again. I was just checking. There we go. Yeah, let's do.
All right. Well, Keith, it's great to be with you. And actually, I'd just love for you if you could restate what you just shared with me is what your goal for our conversation would be today.
Yeah. Well, in some sense, it's the whole reason for writing the book, The Art of Transformational Coaching, and offering workshops, and being here. Um, maybe a little bit of brief background. I not until recently, I've never really hung out my shingle as a coach. I've hung out my shingle as a organizational consultant, organization development consultant, and have just done a ton of coaching in the context of that, as well as with individuals separate from my clients' organizations. And I I've observed that while many coaches, you and I, and many that I know, want to be deep, uh, create a deep experience for clients. They want to, as do I, affect a meaningful change or a transformation in our clients, and or inspire or cultivate, however way you want to look at it. And while that's a desire, and they learn how to ask good questions and how to be present and how to be with another in a way that increases the likelihood they'll transform. I've been somewhat surprised by um, uh, what little thought the coaches have about the transformational process itself. It's almost as if they have techniques here and there, or good questions here and there, or some perspective on transformation and insight that is necessary for transformation, but many coaches haven't really thought through, what is my model, what is my paradigm for how I go about helping ignite a transformation in others. And so my aim in writing the book was to offer a perspective that is a holistic way of understanding a person, and understanding the nature and process of transformation. And so I hope that I can share some of my own thoughts here, and maybe invite yours, and together we can shape an image of a more full image of what transformation could be for an individual.
Yeah, beautiful. And it's a great inquiry. I think it's a very powerful question for any coach, isn't it? To stop and think, what is my model, my map of transformation, or the how I see that working, and
Yes.
not just to imbibe what they've learned from their coach training, but actually to really deeply question it. And
Yeah.
I actually makes me want to ask you then. So how do you hold that? How do you hold what it takes to do deeply transformational coaching? What that path is?
Yeah. Well, it starts with the question, what is transformation, in some sense, and then we can go from there. I would say that transform, the word transform, says a bit. It's a shift of form, a meaningful shift, and of course it's a shift in a positive direction. The shift that we want to inspire in our clients. And so it's a shift in form. And so what form would be the question. And I don't think when I work with a client, or you work with a client, I'm shifting everything,
Mm.
or I'm helping them shift everything. Interesting, I sometimes use the word active. I'm transforming the client. It's actually not that. I'm not transforming the client. I'm inviting the client to transform. So the agent in the transformational process is the client. But what form are we transing in effect becomes the starting point for me. And my answer would be the fundamental paradigm or paradigms that are shaping the problem that the client comes to us with. So clients come and say, "Hey, would you help me?" And we of course ask, "What would you like help in?" And the answer will be, "Well, I have this problem, I have this pattern, I have this tendency. I tend to, I work a lot with leaders, so it would be with leaders. I tend to have difficulty with giving feedback, or I have difficulty with difficult conversations, or I'm not being strong enough or firm enough, or I'm being too firm and too controlling." Whatever the thing that the problem that our client comes to, they're basically saying, "Please help me fix this problem." Well, that problem is more likely than not a pattern, or underneath the problem or underneath the behavior that they're wanting to change, there's a pattern. And that pattern I refer to as a paradigm, a personal paradigm. It may actually have multiple paradigms creating that pattern. And our job is to help invite that client to shift the pattern that's underneath the problem. And so that, to me, is what transformation is about. And in order to invite a transformation, therefore, we need to understand the nature of paradigms, personal paradigms, how they form and how they kind of coalesce and lock in place. And if we don't understand that, then our efforts to try to help the client transform will often fall short. We'll get stuck somewhere and we won't know how to help the client get unstuck, because we don't understand the nature of paradigms. So it really starts with understanding the nature of paradigms. And then I've, of course, thought through quite a bit, how does one go about then shifting a paradigm? Not so easy necessarily, but very doable. Anyway, I'll stop there and see what that...
I think you beautifully teed up the next question for me, is how about understanding the nature of paradigms. Where would you start in helping us to do that in our conversation?
Yeah, well, by the way, I'm happily giving away everything in the book. So obviously the book has more than this, but happily give this all away, partly because my purpose is to share and help the world get better. So especially the world of coaches. So paradigms form, interestingly, many different ways. And I very much enjoyed that process of inquiry for myself about how do these form. I would say there's at least 3 different ways in which paradigms form, and probably more. But the fundamental ones are, depending on what kind of paradigms we're looking at, and we should talk about what are some example paradigms. But they form often from our culture. And either the culture of the society in which we live, depending on how strong that culture is. So, for example, Japan, maybe China to a little lesser extent, Korea, many of the Asian cultures are very strong cultures, very strong, clear rules for how to be. And you get born into this culture, and the family has already perhaps unconsciously adopted the rules of their culture, and the people all around you are behaving consistent with that culture. And you go, "Oh, I'm a young person. I'm looking at all these people. I don't know how to live life, but they seem to know how to live life. So I'll just follow them. And I'll unconsciously adopt the rules that they are following, thinking that that's the way to be in life. And I don't do it. I'm not aware I'm doing this as a little kid. I'm just doing it." So that's one way. And it shapes many of our beliefs and assumptions about what the world should be or how to engage in the world. Simple rules: how to greet, how to say hello, how to eat, when to eat. All those kinds of rules are just out there, and I follow them unconsciously, and it locks in place in my mind until such point as I start to question my culture, which doesn't happen for a while. Starts to happen typically around age 10 or 11 or 12. But until then, those rules get locked in place and unconsciously shape our being. That would be one, just the environment around me. A second would be I'm born, and if you study personality, it becomes kind of interesting. How do personalities form? But I'm born, and I'm born with a gift and a capability. And I do something, and it works. Like I show some more intelligence than the average kid. And my parents smile every time I do something that's really intelligent, or every time I do something that's unusual, they smile and laugh and go, "Oh, you're so great." And I learn, "Oh, I should do that again." I'm getting a lot of juju when I behave this way. And so their response to me starts to teach me what is okay or not okay, or what I should or shouldn't do. And then the third way is through trauma. And this becomes the most interesting one for me, which is if something happens traumatically, either a shock trauma, like I witnessed something that's awful, or my parents beat me up or something like that, or developmental trauma, a repeated absence of something or presence of something that is not helping me grow, I then have to adjust to that trauma, cope with it in some way. And the coping strategy that I use then forms a pattern and a paradigm and a belief that in order to survive, I have to do this kind of thing. There are probably other ways, and if we thought together, we could, what we learn, our educational system teaches us our paradigms. There are other ways, but those are three pretty fundamental that often form early on.
Yeah, that's great. And so then I can imagine they coalesce in some way to then create this personal paradigm that has brought the client success in their life, but I'm hearing also, yeah, that then it's also limiting in some way. Perhaps they've changed roles, they've been promoted, something's happened, and suddenly now their paradigm is getting in the way. So how do you help identify? Because, in one sense, we could say, wow, those are like three quite big areas already, or rich areas, the three you named. So how do you help identify a paradigm with somebody that would be the one, that's the one we need to work with?
For me, it's a joyous process of doing that. It's in some sense, many coaches and that I know believe that that's the key, and I would agree it's part of it, and it's certainly an early part. But the client, let's get a little concrete here. Client comes to you, let me think of one of my clients. Well, here's a good one. It's related to my client that I'll be meeting when we're done with our call. He says, "Keith, I think I'm hesitant and I want to get bolder. As a leader. And sometimes people don't understand what I'm trying to do. I don't put out my expectations very clearly and cleanly. So please help me fix that behavior pattern. I want to be able to be clean in my expectations, and I want to be able to put out my vision strongly and cleanly and clearly. And I don't do that very well. And I know that my supervisor gave me feedback, and so I want that. So teach me." That was his first, teach me. You know something about leadership, Keith. You've written these books and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be taught by what I imagine is a master of leadership. I then go, "Well, I'm not so sure I'm a master, but that's okay. I'll still work with you." So it's really often clients don't ask for a transformation of the deeper self. They ask for a shift in behavior and to learn how to behave better. And so that's the inquiry begins. And I go, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm wondering, client, How long has this been a pattern for you? Oh, that's a good question, Keith. As long as I can remember, client says. Well, let's see if we can dig a little more and see if you can remember a time. Were you always this way? He says, oh, hadn't thought about that. No, I'm not. I wasn't always this way. In fact, when I was really young, I was quite bold. Huh, that's interesting. Well, do you have a sense, client, of when it changed? Now that I think about it. No, so what's interesting about this little story that I'm telling, and this is almost exactly how it happened, is that he hadn't thought about it. Just knew he behaved this way and wanted to change it. And so the inquiry is often that curiosity about when and where and how did it form early on, this particular behavioral pattern. And he discovered that it was somewhere around age 10 or 11. And he shared with me a story of what happened to him at that age when he moved from one school to another, and what had happened. You know how middle school kids can be kind of cruel at times, and how when he was feeling his oats early on, he went to a new school and he was the new kid, and they started to make fun of him and some of the things that he was doing. And he started to feel very hesitant, kind of lost his mojo. And so we started to look at what was the trauma in effect going on for you at that time. And more importantly, what decisions did you make unconsciously about yourself and about life and about people that you needed to make in order to survive that trauma? And so the inquiry is almost always like that for me. When did it begin? And then how did it begin? And what decisions did you make, or what actions did you take in order to deal with whatever it is that was hard to deal with? And almost always that's the emergence. So the inquiry begins early on. Interestingly, they don't come to me for that reason necessarily, but something about my question has them realize, oh my goodness, something's underneath it. And we've got to get underneath it, and we've got to shift the underneath part of it if he's going to change his behavioral pattern. I don't really know if I'm answering your question now, but I think I'm in the ballpark.
Would you then end up perhaps in a place where he's got a sense of this schema or this pattern that, he's taken on? Maybe it's been unconscious, now it's become conscious. It's like a bargain or a commitment he's made. So I'm just curious, like, where you go from there. Like, it sounds like it gets clarified. I'm wondering how you would then help to transform that in some way.
Yeah. Well, so hopefully sometime we'll talk about the whole arc of transformation, but I think we're getting to it anyway as we talk about this. But it seems to me that the insight that I have something underneath, we'll call it a paradigm. You might call it a belief system, but I think it's much more than a belief system about what is good or how to act or how to be. The recognition that there's something underneath is a good beginning place. Most clients don't necessarily recognize it, or they recognize in concept that there is something underneath, and they come to us in hopes to find that underneath. So here he finds it, he sees what's underneath it, and he goes, okay, well, I need to shift the underneath part, the deeper part. And that's where it becomes a little complex and not so easy. Identifying it may be the easy part, but shifting it may not. And the reason is that the choices that the client has made that any of us have made in that moment of trauma or in that developmental trauma, or mostly unconsciously, then get rinsed and repeated throughout their whole life, to the point that it is a powerful habit, not just to have the behavior, but to have the thought that drives the behavior. And it feels often like a survival habit, something I needed to do in order to survive the difficult experience that I was having. And so somewhere along the way, I as a human being, and this client as a human being, says, this is not just a habit, but I will not be able to live life without this pattern. I've actually gotten through. I made it through middle school and high school. I survived. I actually became smarter and better for it. I formed some strategies that worked. And so all paradigms, in some sense, have an upside and a downside, like a coin. Or all strategies that we form have an upside and a downside. And I formed and I reached the upside. I overcame that difficulty. And I basically said, I'm going to show them. This is my client now. I'm going to show them they're not going to take me down. I'll just be smarter and better than them. So he works incredibly hard with enormous determination and drive to be smarter and better. And he becomes smarter and better and becomes quite brilliant in some ways. It's not just a survival strategy to survive, it is a success strategy to succeed. How do I let go of that? If I let go of my paradigm, aren't I letting go of the very thing that has caused my success? So the examination looks at the coin of the paradigm, the upside and the downside. And he has got to be convinced somewhere in his psyche that by shifting the paradigm, I don't lose the upside. Now, of course, I don't get dumber and less capable if I let go of the pattern, but that's the fear, because it's been rinsed and repeated for 20, 30 years. And so now it's not just a strategy, it's a habit that's deeply rooted in my conditioning. And if I'm going to shift the paradigm, we're now in habit shifting land. And so part of the shifting of the paradigm requires that not only do I help the client understand it and see the flip side of the coin nature of it, but also little by little learn to let go of the habitual thought process that's underneath it. So part of what I do at that point is simply offer them what I call learning tasks, kind of like homework to do, to see if he can detect the multiple ways in which he unconsciously repeats the thought process that is underneath the paradigm. And so I give him a task and I have him keep a journal with him, and multiple times a day I have him write a little bit in the journal. What is my thought? And he starts to see that the thought is repeated over and over and over again. And he recognized the deep habitual nature of that thought in many situations. And now he sees how deeply rooted it is. And after that, later on, we start to explore what would be an alternative thought or alternative way of understanding a situation, and then start to little by little develop a different thought. So we have to explore that different thought. We've got to examine it. We have to wonder about it. What would be a different thought? Maybe even role play it, play with it, do some imaginal techniques until he's clear what an alternative thought would be. And then start to form a new habit of that alternative thought. And then he's got to have success with that. Otherwise, he's going to revert right back to the paradigm.
And what about, do you do any work in actually helping to integrate that part of him or collection of parts that, when he was younger arose in response to those adverse situations? I'm just wondering whether you do any work to have those feel seen or integrated. Because I share that because um, I've found that, yeah, like often clients, if you're not careful, then will want to compensate. You know, they might see that I've been doing this thing. It's brought me success, but it's also it's also creating limits. So now I'm going to do something different. But it's just another part of them that's saying, okay, I'm not enough. I need to compensate for this behavior. I'm going to kind of overpower it, and
Yes.
and then that locks it in. So actually, you know, using something like internal family systems, or even relationally between me and the client, that I can support them to actually, which I hear you describe very clearly too, recognize the beautiful intelligence that was
Hmm.
in that paradigm that arose, and that we're not trying to change it right now even. So it's like there's even a dropping of the change agenda. I'm just wondering what comes up as I share this stuff.
Oh yeah, the very same. I love that comment that you just made about interrupt the change agenda, because of course the client wants to change and wants to do it quickly, as expediently, as quickly as possible. Get on with the new life that I imagine I could have. And yes, very much so. So the constant, it's almost like a cosmology, an inner cosmology that exists within and around the paradigm, where um, other parts start to join with the strategy. Parts of themselves join with the strategy to lock that strategy in place. Sometimes there's a inner critic that just keeps pounding on himself, that makes it hard and painful to change, because if he fails to change quickly, he will beat himself up, to because he didn't do it right or good, because he wants to do it right or good, and that's part of his success strategy. And so that inner critic, as part of his inner cosmology, will, if it's a raging inner critic, will be prevent him from even looking deeply, because it's too painful to look deeply. Too much self-judgment arises. So we got to look at the inner critic and its role in the process. Maybe there's a protector, a part of him that's protecting something inside himself. Maybe there's a part of him that has a belief that I can't do this. A voice inside that I'm not worthy, could be present in and around this paradigm. So without a doubt, I think internal family systems or voice dialogue are the two particular models of understanding the self that come to mind, that I work with them. I do some parts work, or I do some voice dialogue. And the client in that process is really just understanding, how does this thing happen? What are the mechanisms inside myself? So instead of trying to change too quickly, they're learning about themselves.
Hmm.
And if I do my job well, that learning becomes as joyous or interesting or fascinating of a process as I can make it. And for most clients, it becomes fascinating to learn that all these tentacles and these little, the inner cosmology is locked in sometimes a rather complex way, and sometimes rather simple. It's hard to know until I get in there and play. Um, but the play is important. How does this get locked, and how do I do that? Oh, when this happens and that person says this, I have that thought which then causes me to behave this way. Oh, that's the rinse and repeat that has I've been going on. And I don't know what it is until I get in there. But it's a lot of fun. I find. I don't know if you find it, or
Yeah,
fun. Not in a woohoo, I'm enjoying doing this to you, but fun fascination kind of fun.
yeah, yeah. To be like amazed in the process,
Yeah,
of how incredible we are. It's in this beauty of these parts that can all arise and coalesce, and
yeah,
be operating, and the intelligence inside of them, and the compassion and the precision that we
yeah.
can bring in order to help create this kind of awareness that becomes very potent that I hear you describe. I think I totally get what you mean. Like it is like fun in inverted commas. It's like you know, I can find myself deeply fulfilled by that kind of connection and that kind of exploration with someone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I like hearing you say too is that, and we might be jumping ahead a bit too far, but you said then you kind of help identify a new belief, and you know, that you're actually beginning to kind of practice that. I think you said belief that would, you know, I'm not sure what the phrase was. A new thought, like a new habit,
It's more new
like
thought
a
process. Yeah. Yeah.
new thought process. That's it. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
And I'm just curious what that process is like. You know, like, and maybe we're talking now about the arc as well, so we can weave that in,
Yeah.
because I think maybe that's another place where coaches struggle. You know, it's like, okay, we've done this excavatory work where there's some integration taking place, but yeah, still, how do you actually begin to embody that new way that would allow me to be bold, for example?
Yeah. Yeah. Before I forget, I don't want to lose that you said you were enjoying being amazed by it. Um, I immediately had this thought of maze. You know, a
Mm,
maze being that which we circuitously find our way to the center and then out again. And it is a maze that we're exploring, and it is amazing to explore that maze. Back to your question, that was just a fun wordplay for me. Um, so the new form. So let's talk about what is a paradigm,
mm,
because it'll help shape how I respond to the question of how do you identify and develop the new form. I think that was the essence of your question. Yeah. So many people equate paradigm with a belief system, and I don't quite equate it that way, although beliefs are part of a paradigm. The way I'm going to make describe the simple version of what I think a paradigm is. I think it's actually even more complex than I write about in the book. But you know, when you write a book or when you write anything, kind of try to get to the essence of something and speak about it. I might write 3 books to describe the complicated nature of even a paradigm itself. But a paradigm, in my mind, at its essence, at its core, is a strategy. So picture this. You might anyway. I won't. I'll try to draw it in the air here. The picture right here, a box, and this box is that strategy, the behavioral pattern itself. It's the thing that the client is saying, I want to change this behavioral pattern. And this behavioral pattern underneath it would have a bunch of actions. You know, not just one thing that I do, but I do it in a variety of ways, multiple ways in which I hold back or withhold. My behavioral strategy is to not speak my mind or agree with people and not speak my mind or my truth. And that's the core of the pattern, let's say. And then underneath it are multiple actions that evince that strategy. Maybe sometimes I just don't say anything. And then other times when I speak, I speak in vague terms. Or maybe other times I always say to the person, I like what you're saying, let me just offer another thought. And so I soften my thought. You know, lots of different ways in which that behavioral pattern gets evidenced in action. So now that's part of the paradigm. And then there's consequences for that set of actions. And the outcomes would be part of the paradigm. I do this, here are my actions, and here are my outcomes. Now we got to ask the question, what causes this behavioral strategy? And now we get into, what are my beliefs? What are my assumptions? What are my needs? And what are my goals, consciously or unconsciously? And maybe we could even add feelings. So beliefs and assumptions, goals and needs and feelings all shape the strategy. And what I'm saying is the totality of all that I just said is the paradigm. It's not just the beliefs. We often equate paradigms with belief. We often believe that if we just unlock the belief and change the belief, the paradigm will shift. Well, I say nay, nay. It's because if it's a more complex constellation, a paradigm is a more complex constellation, then shifting the belief is just one piece of it. So if this is a paradigm, in effect, we should be able to map this. When a client comes to us and says, I have this pattern, early on, I'm wanting to map the paradigm that's underneath the pattern. And if we can map a paradigm, we should be able to map an alternative paradigm. So somewhere along the way, early on, I'm helping the client see their paradigm and mapping it. And then later on, what I'm doing is identify an alternative paradigm and then mapping it. Well, what would be an alternative belief? What will be an alternative set of assumptions? What will be an alternative goal? What be a different need that you might have, or a different way of getting your needs met that would produce a wholly different strategy? And what would that wholly different strategy look like if we had those beliefs and those needs and those goals? And then now, what actions might you take? And so forming the map, the new map, the desired map, becomes an important part of the process. And then the last phase is enacting that map and practicing it, and rinsing and repeating until it becomes a habit. So that's took a while to get to the answer to my answer to your question, but you can see why I needed to do it that way to get to. There's never a simple answer, is there? Maybe there is, and I never come to it. I don't know.
Well, I think that's really helpful what you just shared, actually. So you've got these two maps, yeah, the current paradigm, which was unconscious, and then the new paradigm. And how do you and then you said through practice, rinse and repeat, because that's the question I have, is how do you have that become something embodied, and it doesn't just stay at the level of like, I've got an intellectual awareness of the two maps, and
Yeah.
but I'm still locked in. Like,
Right.
what's that process? We talked about something like internal family systems that can actually really start to create
Yeah.
freedom from parts, recognition when they show up. So that's creating choice. But yeah, what's that path like? You've already started to describe it, but yeah.
Well, so we'll have my hands represent the maps. This is the current or prior paradigm, and this is
For everyone, you're waving your left hand now,
this is
because
my
there's a
left,
bunch of people who listen to this on audio only. So
my left hand. Right. So left to right, past to future. So left hand is past or present. And so here's the interesting thing, and to me, as you ask that question, I think too often coaches go to the desired paradigm quickly. Client says, I want to get rid of this old paradigm. Tired of it. It's not working for me. And I want a new paradigm, and I want it fast, and I want it good. And then coaches are trained often to go via positiva. So we got to go back and kind of look at the fundamental paradigms that coaches hold, often, not all, but many, about the nature of coaching. And if you ask many coaches, they would say, I was trained to learn that the fundamental difference between coaching and therapy is that coaches go to the what do we want to create mode. Coaches go to helping a client identify what is our goal, what is our image, what do I want to create, hold on strong, commit to that goal, commit to that way of being. And that's what's different about coaching than therapy. or one of the key differences. And so I, as a coach, are always future focused. And I learn how to ask good questions. What would be an alternative belief? And how do we then put that belief in place? And so we almost go too quickly to that via positiva, that positive image of what I want to be. That might be useful in some simple paradigms and paradigms that are easily unlockable and easily shiftable. But this becomes the meaningful problem I see with that strategy. Many strategies, many paradigms form and get locked in place for a reason. And until we help the client satisfy the very fundamental reason that paradigm got created in the first place, they're going to try on this new pattern, this new paradigm, but then revert back to the old rather quickly. The simple example I often use is dieting. Many people who try to lose weight and diet through diets, the coach works on the new diet, get the new diet in place, learn the new habits, rinse and repeat. And it lasts for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, a year. But almost inevitably, the person reverts back to the old pattern because the via negativa hadn't been fully done. So if you think of the old pattern and the examination of the old pattern, we'll call that via negativa, looking at the pain and the suffering that created the pattern in the first place. That's sometimes interesting, but also painful to recognize the old patterns. We go to the via positiva too quickly without having done the via negativa, without having examined the old paradigm, then they will revert back because they haven't figured out what is it going to take to let go. So letting go of the old paradigm becomes crucially important for locking in a new paradigm. Grieving the old. Anyway, I can see you're about to offer a thought.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, you're about to answer it because that's and maybe we've been talking about that, but you said grieving it because you said, how do we satisfy the old paradigm? How do we let go? How do we satisfy it?
Yeah, well, it's well. Let's take my client as an example. He's satisfying by obfuscating his view and not speaking his truth. He's playing it safe. He's protecting the 10-year-old in him. And in some sense, the 10-year-old is the one that is driving the strategy. And so that need to be protected is still present for him as an adult. It is for me. I don't walk around, just do things and get beaten up, and I want to be protected to some extent too. So let's treat that need as precious. That need to be protected, to need to not be so judged, to need not to be rejected. That's a need, that's foundational. So part of what he needs to do, and he has been doing, is recognizing that he is actually more safe than he realizes. He is more equipped than he realizes, but also he's not yet fully equipped. So what does it mean to equip him with the capacity to feel safe and not rejected? The answer with this client is, whenever I'm rejected, I reject myself. I say to myself, I did it badly. I beat myself up whenever somebody rejects me. I say, I did it wrongly and badly. I blame myself. And so that blaming of self has been an important feature of my paradigm. he's got to learn to not blame himself when somebody else blames him. He's got to learn how to not take it personally when somebody reacts to him harshly. And so we then actually start to look at the take it personally paradigm, which is embedded in his larger paradigm. When he learns not to take it personally, when he learns that when somebody says something that feels rejecting, it's not rejecting him, it's rejecting his thought or his idea. I am not my idea. Up until now, I am my idea, and it gets rejected, I get rejected. So I have to separate, learn how to separate. And so that when that rejection of my idea comes, I go, oh, they just disagree with my idea. That's okay. That's part of life. And I'll stay in the game and not reject myself when he rejects the idea. So learning how to satisfy his own need not to be rejected requires that he not reject himself. That practice of learning how to not reject himself became an important part of our journey. So he satisfies the need with himself. Not by going out and saying, do you love me? Do you like me? Am I okay? Am I okay? But by holding the point of view that when my idea is rejected, I'm not rejected, and I'm still okay. So we examined that paradigm. We found that that was the key piece of the paradigm that locked it in place. Started to develop that separation from I am not my idea. Therefore, I am not rejected. Therefore, I am okay. And if I'm okay, I'm able to continue to explore and play. I think I'm making sense. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it has that kind of quality. That's why the examination of the paradigm is important in its fullness. And then eventually he gets his need met by himself. In other cases, maybe you get the need by having a certain support system that you turn to. It depends on the paradigm. So, but the need has got to be gotten, has got to be met. And once it's met, then he can let go of the paradigm, the fundamental paradigm. Yeah.
A couple of things come up. One is I hear that this is developmental, that he's actually, there's a learning here that he could apply to other places, that in some way he's been fused with a certain part of thinking, and that now he can see, it's my idea that someone's critiqued, and it's not me,
Yeah.
and that's a shift. He's become more spacious, and so that I can see that playing out in other places in his life. Because I remember that there was a phase in my life where there was just a real shift around that inner critic, the inner, like being fused with my inner critic, and
Yes.
and like I didn't have to take myself so seriously anymore. It was quite a relief.
Yeah.
But the other thing I'm wondering is how somatic is this process as well? How much because I found that to be an important place to include. The somatic aspect, the emotive, affective aspect of it. That the work is holistic and not just residing in a rational sphere. And I just wonder if you,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a great inquiry. First, I want to say I don't think I'm expert in this area. Some people, coaches, have a therapeutic background to the point and have worked somatically their own work to the point where they're able to guide others in somatic. I'm really good at being with a client as they're emoting, as they're feeling, either tender or joyous or everything in between. I feel like I hold space well, and I value and recognize that, much like, who's that guy that wrote Being Present? I can't remember, the German guy. I can't remember his name, but He talks about
Martin Buber.
yeah, no,
No.
more recent, but he talks about the pain body.
Oh, it's
Um,
not. I mean, I'm thinking there's Eckhart Tolle who writes about the pain
Eckhart
body,
Tolle,
but
yeah. Eckhart
yeah,
Tolle.
yeah.
Yeah, so these things that happen to us, especially if it's trauma based, if the paradigm formed through trauma, that 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 trauma gets locked into our pain body. And the trauma, by the way, isn't the event itself, it's the what we did with the event that locks the pain. It's our interpretation of the event, the meaning we made out of that event, the decisions we made then get locked into our pain body. And because of that somatic, especially if it's trauma related paradigm, is really important. If it's one of those other causes of a paradigm, the somatic is not as crucial because there's not a pain body there. It's just a habit that we unconsciously form. But I don't know, at least 50% of all the paradigms that I work with are trauma related. And so you're speaking something that's fundamental. Holding space is the minimally what's needed, because there will be tears and grieving. And my job as a coach in that moment is just to hold space and love the client up. And minimally. There's more to somatic work than that. And what I want to say is I'm not well versed in the more. I couldn't say to you, here's how you go about when the pain body is locked in very strongly. Here's how to do somatic work. There's some people that do movement. Some people do mat work, go on the mat and lie down. And, sometimes there's a famous psychiatrist in the 50s and 60s who did a lot of body work that unlocks some of those features of the pain body. I don't think I'm real skilled in that. If it requires that with a client and you as a coach are not skilled in it, then partnering with somebody who is skilled is a good idea. And that's what I do. If it feels like it's that deep and that locked in, I'd say work with a somatic therapist or somatic coach, because I'm not quite as skillful in that particular arena.
I appreciate you sharing that, but I do think what you're saying about holding space and that loving presence, even though you said there's more to it than that, that is fundamental. And of course, there's been countless studies that are proved in therapy that the quality of the relationship is at least as significant, if not more, than the actual technique or approach deployed. And so for me, because also in those moments you can actually model, and this is where you can take something like internal family systems, and actually it's more playing out between you and the client. You're modeling like a loving, accepting presence, which is the thing they didn't have in that moment when that paradigm was formed. Either internally they weren't accepting them, or others around them weren't. And so just that kind of presence and allowing what's there to be there can be very potent. So I appreciate you naming that. And well, I guess I have some other questions, but I want to ask you first. What have we not talked about in this process that you think is important to bring in?
Huh.
I'm appreciating this kind of tour de force through your thinking around transformation.
Oh, thank you. I'm enjoying this as well. I'll say one more thing, and maybe we can also then just talk about the arc of transformation. But the thing that I surprised myself as I, for years and years and years, examined the nature of transformation for myself, just for my own evolution and transformation, but also since I'm an agent of transformation for others, the thing that surprised me the most was how important understanding habits are. And I wrote about this in the book, but it's I have a friend who I meet with regularly, and almost every time I meet with him, we have very soulful, deep conversations. And he almost always says, "I had a big insight. I'm transformed." And interestingly, over 15 years, it's the same thing that he has the insight about, and the same thing that he declares he's transformed about. And it took a long time before I finally said to him, you've been telling me for years that you've been transformed. How is it that every year, another year later, you're telling me you're transformed about the very same thing? As if he's locked in a Groundhog Day of he's locked in this, can't get out of his paradigm, but he has the insight. And so this has become a little bit of my symbol of what's the problem with transformation is we often equate it with insight. We often think that if we can help the client get the insight, that will magically cause the transformation. And it does, sort of. But why does the client keep reverting back? Why does my friend have the insight, think he's transformed, and then 2 weeks later behaves the same way until he has the insight again, comes to me the next time and says, "I have an insight, I was transformed." Why does he keep doing that? And I think the simple answer is insight is not enough. And the last phase of the transformational process is not the learning of the new habit, it's the adoption of the new habit. And until that new habit is secured in place, then I say this is not a transformation. This is an insight, but not a transformation. It goes very back to Kurt Lewin's simple model of change: unfreeze, change, refreeze. Very simple, elegant model that guides all changes. And the unfreeze is what we've talked a lot about. How do you unlock, and how do you discover what the paradigm is and unlock it? How do you learn new behaviors? That's the change. But the refreeze is about forming and locking in a new habit. And the surprise for me, and I'll leave it at this for now, we don't have enough time to explore the nature of habit formation, but the surprise for me, and it's kind of a joyous surprise, is that learning how to form and coalesce a new habit is every bit as important as the insight. And I, for 25 years, 30 years of coaching, gave the habit phase short shrift because I was so enamored with the insight. I love that insight, just like my friend loves it. I have an insight, Keith. I just discovered something I hadn't seen. I'm so enamored with that. It's such a wonderful, joyous moment when that insight occurs that we fail to realize the habit formation is crucial.
And I know you said we haven't got time. Hopefully we've got a few minutes. I know we could talk about this a long time, but if we've got a few minutes, what do you want to say to coaches listening now that you've learned that's really like the heart of locking new habits in?
Well, briefly, I will. I should get royalties on this, but I would say read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, I think his name. It was not my first book about habits, but the most clear, lucid expression of how habits form and how do they change. He doesn't go into paradigms a lot. I don't think he's a paradigm guy. I don't think he's a transformational guy, but he is certainly a learning new habits kind of guy. And he describes the nature of habits in a really lucid way. And just read the book. It's a good book. And I don't know why my accent is changing, but
channeling the spirit of James Clear.
Channeling James Clear, yeah. But read the book. I just became Midwestern all of a sudden. re, to appreciate the simple, elegant adoption of a new habit, and the rinse and repeat, necessary rinse and repeat. So I'll say one more thing. He calls it atomic habits, atomic meaning small, tiny. And I think that's meaningful. So what I do based on that simple idea is I don't ask the client to change everything and change it all at once. I say, let's take a simple one. Let's take a little one. Let's take a little feature of this habit. Let's work on when somebody disagrees with you strongly and it seems judgmental and it seems like you're being rejected, let's see if you can remember to introduce the thought that I am not my ideas. I am much more than that. And they are not rejecting me. So let's try on that little habit of remembering that I am not my habit. I am not my idea. And then learn that habit. And then he does that for a little bit, and he can do that. He's capable. And he gets a little bit of success from it, a little bit of joy of, oh, it didn't sting so much when I thought this way versus the way in which I used to think. And so he develops that little habit, and then another little habit. And then almost like the features of the new paradigm, let's take them a bit by bit. And in rather short order, 2 or 3 months, the new habit is forming fully, but bit by bit by bit, so that he can have a success experience. He can feel good about his new paradigm, and he's feeling it's working. And the more it works, the more he's eager to do more of it. And the more that happens, it starts to, cycle upward.
Snowball, or
snowball,
exponential kind of
yeah.
enthusiasm to keep going. Yeah,
There's a lot more there, and even in the habit area, but I would say that's its essence for me.
yeah, yeah. No, I was a bit humbled to discover in myself how habitual, I mean, over the years, how habitual we are, but how, automated my daily routine is in a way, It's like, oh God, I'm like an animal or something, actually, if I'm just like repeating these habits over and over, and they're all linked to my environment, and my relationships in this way that's a bit, I thought I was this conscious being, liberated, but actually, but the flip side of that is if I start to make little changes in my environment, in my routine, and they compound over time, it has a significant impact,
Yeah.
on the outcomes of my life. So there's a flip side to that. So
Yeah.
well, I'm aware of the time. I think there's other questions I had, but maybe we have to do a part two. Particularly want to ask you about contracting with people in a way that increases the potential for transformation. That's one of the things I see you writing about, and other questions. But I want to express my gratitude to you, actually, Keith. Yeah, I really feel your dedication to this practice and sincerity in what you've shared today. And I think it's a real service. I think people listening to this will be inspired and learn from it. So thank you.
I hope so. Thank you. So the contracting, maybe I'll just say a little bit, maybe tantalize.
Yeah, let's
were you asking me to talk about contracting, or were you?
Well, I was saying we could do it next time, but let's leave a cliffhanger.
Maybe next time, but let's leave a little teaser on it. I think it's important. I think we consciously or unconsciously form agreements with each other all the time. And here's just the question without giving an answer. What form of agreement would we want to form if we're going to do paradigm shifting work? What kind of agreement do we need to make with the client, and the client with him or herself, to engage in paradigm shifting work? I think becomes an interesting question. So we'll just kind of leave it there.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Where can we find out more about your work? Yeah, and your book as well. And
Yeah, yeah. So the book is The Art of Transformational Coaching. It's out and available, Amazon and other places to get it. Um, uh, I have a website called artoftransformationalcoaching.com. And there you can learn about the workshop that I offer. I offer two workshops. I offer a foundational workshop or a introductory workshop. It's a 10 week experience. And then I offer a practicum where people who are interested in going deeper, they join me in a deeper inquiry and practice, um, uh, to learn the process. What I want to say one more thing about it, which is, while I have developed a model and an arc of transformation and a way of understanding the process, um, it's not the be all end all. I would love, if nothing else, I would love coaches to think deeply on it and either adopt the model that I offer or come to their own, think deeply about the nature of transformation, and be more grounded in their own process for how I guide a client through this. And so, in the practicum, I don't say, you missed step 4 of my model. I go, oh, that was an interesting way of approaching it. Oh, that kind of worked. Let's wonder about that. And why did that work? And I'm not teaching the model and training people as much as I am joining them in the deeper investigation of transformation. And so I learn and it's fun. But the introduction is really teaching the model and as a foundation. But anyway,
nice. Thanks, Keith.
yeah. I also have another website, which is my primary work. It's my consulting and coaching. It's called leadership-pathways.com. Leadership-pathways.com, and you can learn about me there. But just if you Google my name, I'm out there. Yeah. Well, this has been a
Nice.
lot of fun for me, Joel. Long time coming. I think we met a year ago. And thank you for reading the book. I don't know how much of you read it, but I think I remember you said a long time ago, well, let me read the book first, and then we'll see if we want to talk. So
Yeah.
thank you.
That's great. I'll cut it there. Yeah, I really appreciate this, Keith. I'll stop recording as well.